And if you're keen and on time, please do let us know in the chat where you're dialing in from. It's kind of great to get a feeling for where everybody's coming from. And let's just get us on Facebook Live, and then we're ready to kick off. Okay, Facebook's having a think. Okay, so let's see if we've got anyone on the chat. Oh, Roger is here. Hello, Roger. Thanks for joining us. And okay, we're live on Facebook. So just in case you've just joined us, my name is Laurie Walmsley. I'm the communications manager covering for Flo Shalom at Network of Wellbeing. While Flo is off raising her new child, very exciting. And I've got Jennifer Wallace here with me from Carnegie UK Trust, and Jennifer is the joint interim CEO and head of policy for Carnegie UK Trust, and she leads the Wellbeing and Towns team there. Jennifer's worked in public and voluntary sectors for over 2 decades and has a focus on practical change. And she's a prolific author, as you might be able to see from the many books and reports behind her, of more than 40 reports and 3 books. And she's a recognised expert on wellbeing, public sector reform and community empowerment. Now, before we dive in, just another invitation to please share with us where you're joining from. And just a few technical kind of practical points in case you're new to Zoom. So if you look at the bottom of the chat window, you should see there's a Q&A button, and there's a chat button. Say, hi, Josh from Devon. It's another Now team member. Oh, we lost you for a moment there, Jen. You're back. That's good. Yeah, so there's a chat button that opens up the chat window for you. Let me just check that chat is enabled for everybody. Yeah, looks like it is. And then there's a Q&A box. So we'll kind of log questions in there to put to Jen once I've run through a few questions with her. If you can remember to post questions into the Q&A, that's great. But if not, don't worry. Just pop them in the chat, and we'll get them transferred across. So just to explain a bit about the format. So we've got 20 minutes of Q&A. So I'll put some questions to Jennifer about her work on twinning towns and how that can help boost wellbeing. Then we'll have a short sort of interactive exercise to help you think a bit about, how could you explore this if you think this might be something that could improve your own life and life in your town community. Then we'll have 15 minutes until 10 to 7 for audience Q&A, and then we'll close and just have a couple invitations, sort of next steps for things that you can do. So let's just see if we've got anyone else mentioning where they're joining from. Not so far. Okay, so let's dive in. So yeah, first of all, Jennifer, it would be great if you could sort of tell us a bit about the story of what made you and Carnegie UK interested in town twinning. I mean, I think a lot of us have probably seen town signs of this town is twinned with somewhere exotic in France or the Caribbean or something, but I'd say I wasn't too familiar with the idea or even considered sort of domestic town twinning. So I'd be interested to know sort of how that kind of resonated with you and with Carnegie UK?
Sure. So for a number of reasons, the twinning that most people know, the one that you're talking about, actually established in the post-war period around Europe, where we were trying to build the peace. And it was instigated then as a way of linking different parts of Europe together so that we could all feel like we were part of a shared story, I guess, and a shared
Sure.
future together. Now, when we were thinking about it, so, the Carnegie UK Trust is based in a town. I'm speaking to you from Dunfermline here, which is north of Edinburgh, if you don't know Scotland very well. It's a lovely part of Scotland, it's a lovely town. And we were thinking about how we could help local people to deliver change themselves. What we didn't want to do was sort of lob in another set of expert capacity building programs. We wanted to look at what towns could do together for each other. And we were quite surprised that actually there isn't that much history of domestic twinning, like you are surprised. It's not something that's been done. So we were interested that it hadn't been done. We were interested to give it a go. And I guess part of the narrative around it was also in this, sort of difficult environment we're currently in around Brexit. While the project started a little bit before that, it is something that, has become a bigger part of the conversation around town twinning and what it might be able to help with as a way of sharing between different parts of the UK. So you'll know when it's in our Brexit and Towns report that, there's a pretty solid analysis that it's the towns who voted to leave the EU, despite what they may gain out of it, and it's often those places that are thought of as left behind, who voted for Brexit, and we wanted to change that narrative. We want to change that narrative. We want to focus on the positive, and we want to focus on what people can do themselves to make change happen in their local area.
Great, that's really interesting to kind of have the context. And so you mentioned sort of feeling of being sort of left behind. Are there any other sort of particular problems that you perceive as sort of common across towns that maybe would benefit from twinning? I know one thing is obviously decline of certain industries and I guess a corresponding sort of reduced motivation. But were there any other sort of commonalities you saw that just felt like they were weighing down these places?
Yeah, so there are decisions that are collectively made around the UK about where we put infrastructure, where we invest in transport, which structurally disadvantage our smaller places, and that has a compound effect. So regularly, if you're doing towns work, people will talk about not just the loss of transport links, but that combined with the loss of the pub, combined with the loss of the post office, combined with a digital infrastructure that never seems to get to them. And it all adds up to a sense of a two-tier society, and some of our smaller places are on the wrong side of that equation.
Sure, that's great. Thank you. Kind of paints a bit of a fuller picture. How did you actually go about exploring domestic town twinning, and what was the kind of thinking, and who ended up getting twinned?
So we did it initially. We were going to do it just in Scotland, and then we got so much interest about the idea that we expanded it across the whole of the UK. So we were able to increase, some of the provision, some of the partnerships because of that. It did give us a challenge because that then gave us much broader geographical spread than we were expecting when we first planned the programme. So it gave us a bit of a challenge, but it did really help us with some of those issues around Brexit and building bridges between different places and so on. So we asked people to submit their expressions of interest, people who wanted to come along with the programme. We didn't go searching for them and saying, you have a problem and we think twinning could help. We asked people to come to us and say, we have an idea, are you interested in being part of this? And we've got a reasonably high number of people who wanted to be part of that story. What we then did was quite an intricate process of sort of linking up places that were similar enough to get something out of it, and that was a big challenge, and we had a group of people who helped us with that, to try and identify places who would learn from each other. So not just places that had the same challenge, but also that had a different way of looking at it. So you would get, for example, North Shields twinned with Merthyr Tydfil, which is our furthest away geographical spread. So you've got North Shields up in the northeast northeast on the coast, and Merthyr is down in Wales. And there's a big geographical spread, but very similar issues developing around how can they create a pool for people to come into the town. You know, why would anybody want to go to Merthyr? Why would anybody want to go to North Shields? And they were able to share that challenge and share some of their experiences to find new and innovative solutions.
Great. I wonder, I hope this isn't putting you on the spot too much, but if you happen to remember the names of the 6 towns, don't worry if you don't, because I've got them here. I thought that might just be interesting for people. I mean, they've all got
the way that they were then finally twinned. That is the challenge. So you've got Merthyr and North Shields, Whitburn and Oswald Whistle, and Brashane, and it's always that last one that Brashane was. If you got the list,
Wooler. It says, yeah.
Wooler.
So I mean, just to flag where these places are, because apart from Merthyr Tydfil and North Shields, I couldn't put them on a map. So Brashane is Northern Ireland, Wooler's Northumberland, North Shield is in the northeast, Merthyr Tydfil's in Wales, of course, and then Whitburn's in Scotland, and Ostwald Whistle, is that right? It's in Lancashire. Yeah, so I mean that is quite spread. And did you have any particular funding to kind of support the programme?
Yeah, we did. So we did it in 2 ways. We operate what I would call a plus funding model. So we ask people to come along to these programs and to engage with the trust because they're interested in the activity, not just the funding. So we're quite keen on making sure that the people who participate understand that it's far more than just money that we're able to give as an independent trust. But they did, each of them in total got over £10,000 to work on the initiatives that they wanted to in their local area to improve well-being, and they varied in terms of what they did with that, and we were quite light touch with how they spent it, because they'd gone through that intense process of deciding what was right for their place, inspired by the others involved in the programme.
Great, yeah, and as we all know, train tickets aren't very cheap in the UK, so
No.
Sure it was helpful to have a bit of money to help with that.
Well, we funded all of that separate. So
I see.
Separate from the money that they had. So they had all of that kind of, coming together, hospitality, venue support, we funded separately, and we funded the evaluation of it separately. So that money is the money that they actually got to spend themselves.
Oh, great. Okay, that's really good. You've touched on this a bit already, Jennifer, but I think it might be interesting to know a bit about, what sort of attributes made effective pairings, whether it was kind of distance, a particular similarities or difference, or, transport links, those kind of things.
Yeah. So certainly we found that a lot of the trends were different in terms of who was involved. So you would get, sometimes it was volunteers, sometimes community organisations, and sometimes it was people in the council who had a delivery job to do. And we weren't particularly top down about who could get involved in it. And that diversity really helped in terms of getting a different conversation and getting people to bring themselves to the conversation rather than the job titles. So that was a really interesting development, and that's something that we do in other parts of our work around kindness and engaging with people in a relational way. So we were really pleased to see that. Where we probably could have done more is then supporting the people who didn't have an organisation behind them. So because we did have volunteers, I think we had to play a bit of catch up with ourselves to make sure that we were providing them with what they needed. The other thing that we've talked about is that sweet spot in geographical distance that we didn't quite find, but I think we could probably perceive now. So if a place is too close to you, then you're part of a shared story within a region. So if it's 2 towns in Yorkshire, then they're part of the shared story of Yorkshire, and they don't have to explain to each other what that shared history or heritage is. But the further away you go, the more you have to explain it, and you have to explain it in a very particular way, which isn't a common way of explaining your place. So you have to explain the history, the industrial history, the cultural history. If you're in Wales, you might want to explain what language you speak, or in northern Scotland. So you have to be far enough away to have that type of a conversation about what your place feels like, but close enough to get transport links, which was a big challenge for the project, particularly North Shields and Merthyr.
Yeah, I can imagine. Interesting. And so, did you have a rough kind of number on, the distance, a rough sort of range that you feel would be optimal? I guess it's hard to know with only three pairings, but
it's hard to know. It's hard to know, and I think it's more to do with actually the accessibility of the transport.
right.
So I would have said, anything more than 3 hours travel time is just really difficult for people to do. That's
Sure.
more than one day.
Yeah.
If you're going to do something in that day. Certainly, anything less than 50, 60, 70 miles doesn't feel like it's far enough away. So you're kind of looking around that.
Okay.
And I think something around the 100 miles is a nice way of catching it.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the famous 500 miles, you've gone too far.
Sure. I guess it depends in a way in terms of extrapolating to other countries. It kind of depends where you are, because 100 miles in the US or Canada would probably feel like next door, but yeah. Over here it's a fair way. That's great. And what do you feel works well in terms of actually supporting relationship building? What kind of lessons did you pull out that that was really helpful in getting people to connect?
Yeah, but certainly by the end of it, getting people in a room, getting them to share stories, supporting the hospitality, supporting the time for people to come together really, really helped. I think initially we focused so much on the pairings, visiting each other, that we'd lost that sense of, maybe not lost, but didn't build enough of that sense of actually being part of a bigger program and a bigger story of change. I think we caught up with ourselves by the end of it, but it would have been nice to do some of that earlier. Encouraging them to go to see places, to do each other's heritage walks, to try out each other's activities, certainly helped, and we say here at Carnegie, quite a lot that it's people that influence people. It's not a report that influences people. It's getting that report explained by somebody that you like and you trust, that is going to make you likely to want to take those messages forward. So building that time and that space for those conversations really matters.
Great. Okay. So it's kind of intuitive, but it's great to hear that was such a benefit and so important. And were there any particular lessons that came out that you think could be transferred to other towns if they wanted to set up their own thing, or even lessons that might be useful even outside of a sort of formal twinning relationship?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. One of the things that came out massively was the variability in digital skills. So it's interesting that we're doing this on Zoom, and we're doing this using new technology. But a lot of the people that we were working with didn't have the confidence to do that, or didn't know what could be done in their local area. So we did digital audits with them, and that really helped as a way of, well, actually, what is the digital footprint of our place? Because it's not what we think it is. So people from the outside don't see it the way that we think, and then the people we were working with don't have the skills to change that, having identified it as a problem. So certainly that's an interesting way in to look at the digital aspect of it. The other things that I would say to anybody setting it up is to if you know that kind of management mantra, to go slow to go fast. So start really, really slowly, and with very little pressure, and the purpose is just to get to know people, and that shortcuts when you get later on and things can move faster, but if you don't get the bottom, the front end of it right and phased right, you'll spend the rest of the program trying to play catch up.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful takeaway, not just for town twinning, but for life. I think I could do with getting it as a tattoo, or at least writing it on my laptop screen. I hear it on a podcast every now and again, but I think it's a great thing these days as we feel pressure to kind of operate faster and faster. Now, you mentioned digital audits, and I remember reading that you had a digital gateway. Could you explain what that was as a project, Jennifer? And you also touched on heritage trails. Just any other things that were inspired by the twinning relationships?
Sure. So the kind of practical things. So the digital gateway idea is really interesting. It's once you've identified that actually the digital footprint of a town can be really low, and really low quality.
Yeah.
It's a way of saying, well, what would happen if we, if we did pull together everything that we know about our town in a kind of online gateway mechanism, so that we can sell it in inverted commas, but also tell that more positive story of place, what's on offer here. And a lot of these, small businesses, not digitally enabled, in a small local place, is perhaps not giving as positive a message as they might want to about the quality of that place. So there's that side. The other stuff that, particularly around the well-being side, that I know, you'll be interested in, things like the cycle trails, where people were able to learn from each other about how you actually set up a cycle group and a cycle trail to tell the story of your place, which is really nice.
Not just painting the road blue, as they
exactly.
as we're keen on in London.
Yeah, no, but it's like, what is the purpose of it, and what's the purpose of creating those trails around a place, heritage trails, things that you can go around a place and find out what what used to be there, again, about that, telling the story and the positive story of place and helping people feel more bound to that sense of belonging really helped. And we had a great one in Whitburn where they managed to reclaim the use of a community asset, a very, very small hall, but reclaim it for community use. And that was a brilliant story, because we need, and again, if I reflect back on our sort of broader work on kindness, we need places and spaces for people to meet and to use in local settings. Otherwise, you don't get that just basic human connection that everything relies on.
Yeah, and we're I guess with austerity programs and things like that, there's becoming fewer and fewer sort of public spaces where people can actually gather without having to sort of pay money. So that's great to know that was something that you were able to make happen. That's really good.
With small amounts of money as well, which again is, perhaps contradictory to what some of our messages are, as a society, that, you need £100,000, to get something done. And, this was small money, and it really relied on the energy and the enthusiasm of the local people to make it happen. It's a totally different asset to unlock.
Sure. That's good. That's interesting. And the different projects, how do they actually impact people's well-being? What were the ways that people actually benefited from the twinning that you kind of saw in commonality across the three different links?
So I think there's some lovely stuff about refinding that sense of belonging, that story of place, and enjoying finding that story of place, So one of the things that we talked about in the report and in some of the follow-up blogs was about just the value of seeing ourselves as other people see us, and investing in that story. And that gave people a real and a deep sense of confidence, that they didn't have to describe themselves or their place as a deficit or a problem. They could find a different language to describe it. It still reflected that there were things that they need to improve well-being, but perhaps the balance of the language was just a little bit more on the side of the positive. So that was really good. Of course, confidence building, when you get into that sense of it, allows people to hear their own voice. And once they've done that, they're more likely to use that voice in different settings. So you get a kind of ripple effect. Once people can build up that capacity, when they can see that they can actually affect change in their local area, that they then do start getting a bit louder, a bit bolshier, and that's great. So there's that kind of community empowerment outcome that comes out of it, and for some of them it was about getting to know each other a bit better in their local place, as well as getting to know their partners in the other place.
Wow, yeah, so loads of benefits. That's wonderful. Making me want to set up my own link when I get back to Totnes later this week. That's fantastic. So we've actually got time for a couple more questions that I didn't think we'd be able to squeeze in. So that's nice. We can kind of dive into some of the more kind of thorny and topical stuff. So there's obviously there's the B word that's been weighing on everybody's minds. I can probably just I can cope with saying it one more time for any attendees that aren't from the UK or haven't been living under a rock. So Brexit. So it feels, like a kind of particularly divided time in the UK. Do you feel that there are any sort of learnings from the project that could help us kind of transcend political divides or local feelings of division and find shared solutions to become kind of more connected and develop a wider sense of community again?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of strands you can pull on that. If we take the overriding successful message of the Brexit vote was take back control.
Yeah.
That's what people feel in a lot of our places, that they don't have any control. So we can find mechanisms to help them feel agency and control over their local place and over their lives, then that might help improve their own well-being. So there's a core message there about actually, Brexit may or may not deliver the type of control that people want, but certainly they deserve more control over their own lives, and there are ways that we can do that. And this type of program, building on, peer support and finding that local energy, may be one of those sort of modern solutions to that problem, instead of a top-down model of, we will deliver such a community program to all towns, So there's that side of it. The other side of it is what happens when you bring diverse people together, who don't necessarily know that they share something. And one of the things that we found in this program and in other aspects of our work is really, when you get down to it, what people want for their local community is actually very, very similar. Yeah. So while on the surface it may look like there are divisions, what they want to be in existence in their local place to improve their well-being and the well-being of their families, the people they live around, it's all pretty similar stuff. They want places to go, they want places to bump into each other, they want to be able to use the transport system, they want to be able to access public services, conveniently, and not have to take 3 buses to get them, Sure. So there's, those kind of messages. Because of that similarity, you can help bring people together, build those relationships, build the conversations, and build the trust. At the end of the day, people might still disagree about the big question of Europe, but hopefully they would do that in a sense where they had more trust in each other, more respect for each other's position. Most of the vitriol about Brexit happens on Twitter, and that's not a surprise. It happens in semi-anonymous settings where people feel enabled to do that. In a town setting or in a project that is about relationship building and about face-to-face relationship building, there's less space or opportunity for that kind of vitriol, because you have to do it looking somebody in the eye, and that just feels like a significantly different experience, than what you get on social media.
Great. So actually a lot of the benefits arise just naturally out of focusing on a kind of a face-to-face connection.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling very inspired, and I imagine everybody else is, but I'm sort of wondering, what kind of first steps can I take? What steps can we take to start to forge a twin town connection if we don't have one with another UK town or with another town in whatever country we're currently in?
So you need to find somebody who's like you a little bit, and there are a number of different ways that you can do that. If people are in Scotland, we have a tool with Scotland's Towns Partnership called Understanding Scottish Places, which if you plug in your place, it'll tell you other places in Scotland that are like you.
Wow.
So you can use that, and you can find out interesting places that are just far enough away, to stimulate.
Right. It's like Tinder for towns.
Yeah, exactly. And we are developing one in Wales at the moment as well. So by the end of this year, there'll be an opportunity to plug in your name, your town name in Wales, and it'll tell you where's like you. We don't have such a tool for England or Northern Ireland, though we might get there at some point.
It's okay. We know you're focused on Scotland. That's fair enough.
So it's just sometimes it's easier to try things out in your back garden, you know. So what I would suggest there is, you know, you're looking for places that are roughly similar in terms of size and tier of government, you know, so you can have a similar kind of conversation around that. You're probably looking for somewhere that either has a shared characteristic like a coastal town or a post-industrial town, you know, those kind of characteristics, market towns, for example, so that there's something to connect with there, to join the dots. Or you can go the statistical route and say, you know, well, you know, our town, for example, might have one of the most rapidly aging populations in the UK. If I Google, you know, who else is aging, you know, what other towns are aging significantly, then, you know, that would be a way in. And then a bit where you have to take a deep breath, because we're not, you know, at the moment, we're not facilitating those links. We've facilitated the links and we're not doing that at the moment. You have to take a deep breath and actually put yourself out there and try to contact somebody. As I said, with the town stuff, what we found is it really doesn't matter which sector people are from, you know, it's just about finding somebody who is active in that to have a conversation, you know, and just take it from there. And I think if you start off with that conversation that says, you know, here's our stuff, you know, how are you handling that? Then you know, you can start and spark the conversation and just see where it goes from that basis.
Great. That sounds like a great hook. I think often when you've got a way to start a connection, that's kind of all you need. You know, you don't have to map out the entire relationship. It's just about getting started and getting just a bit out of your comfort zone. Yeah, that's really useful. Brilliant. So we've got a short exercise now, just to help everyone who's joining us and maybe watching this at a later date to just do a bit of preparation, I suppose, to make a similar kind of connection. So thanks a lot, Jennifer, for the suggestion of doing this. I think it's a great way to kind of get into the mindset. So what it would be great if everyone could do, if they've got pen and paper, or perhaps you could share in the chat box, is to think about how you would describe the place that you live to a stranger. So whether it's a city, a town, a village, or a suburb, to a stranger who lives more than 100 miles away. And we invite you to think about the historical perspective. So a bit about, you know, what's the story of the place, and also try and focus on assets, not deficits. So, you know, what are the positives of living there? What do you enjoy, and what do people generally appreciate about the place that you live? And yeah, we invite you to share these in the chat, and also maybe a note about whether this is how you normally think about your place, and if it isn't, you know, why not? Is there another story that's sort of taken the place of looking at those positives? So let's just have a look and see if there are any fast typers. And I will. I mean, I've been a bit nomadic this year, so I'll have to pick a place, but I'll pick Totnes, and I'm just going to mute myself while I type this in so that it me clattering away. But essentially what I'm thinking of saying is that in Totnes, in Devon, in southwest England, it's a place, it seems to me anyway, where a lot of people come to sort of heal, you know, whether that's emotionally or physically, you know, from burnout or trauma or something, you know, any kind of challenge. It seems to draw a lot of healers and people that are sort of looking for healing. And while that can bring its challenges, I think it brings a huge kind of diversity and a lot of sort of caringness. There's a lot of care and compassion in the community, and that's something I really love about Totnes and about wider Devon as well. And Jennifer, would you be willing to do this for is it Dunfermline you're in?
So it's Dunfermline that the office is based.
Yeah.
But I live in a small town called Larber.
Okay.
down the road. And when I moved there, that's the first time that I hadn't lived in a city or a suburb in my entire life, you know. But Larbert used to have an awful lot of ironworks, so it's kind of an interesting place as you go around some of the post-industrial heritage, and there's still some cannons lying around with cannonballs back in the day when they did the ironwork. So it's quite a good fun place for some of that industrial heritage side of it. I think it's a fantastic place, but it has a train station, it has a post office, it has a pub, you know, it has an Indian takeaway which we frequent, you know. So for a place of, you know, sort of 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people, it actually has an awful lot of stuff to offer, you know, and we're very lucky to have that, and it's very valuable. I think probably the first thing I noticed when I moved in there is just the time that people spend getting to know each other, you know, and caring about each other, and that is just very different from, I've lived at that point in you know, sort of inner city for well over 10 years in various places, you know. I'm just used to not having that kind of just more chat, you know, how are you doing, where are you going, you know, but it's certainly a different piece of life, and it's one I enjoy.
Well, it's fantastic. You're still there and enjoying all those benefits. Thanks a lot for sharing. So we've had I think it's Judy, although I think Judy's name's turned into an ellipsis. Let me see if I can. Yep, it's Judy. So we've got Judy saying, it's definitely an ex-mining town, extremely fast-growing and becoming more like a commuter town for Edinburgh. Judy, would you mind sharing where that is? I didn't catch the name. And then Roger says about Plymouth, a somewhat faded, medium-sized seaside city with a strong naval history. It's one of the finest settings of any city in the UK, and a generally friendly, unassuming population. Well, I don't know many people from Plymouth. Roger's one of them, but I'd say he's definitely right on that count. That is a bit of a source of shame for me, as I still haven't been to Plymouth, despite having lived on and off in Devon for about a year and a half. I do need to amend that soon. Great. So, Judy says, so that's Mayfield. She was talking about the ex-mining town south of Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for taking part in that, and I hope that's a useful just primer of your sort of storytelling neurons to get you ready for connecting and reaching out to people in towns 100-ish miles away. So we've got some time now for audience Q&A. So let's just have a look at the Q&A box. So I've got one from Judy, which is asking about, you know, what are the benefits for the places that get twinned? Now, hopefully we've covered that in a fair bit of detail, but Judy, if there's anything specific you'd like Jennifer to elaborate on, then please pop a message in the chat. We've got a question from Roger that says, can you please tell us a little more about what the towns wanted to cooperate with each other about, and how that improved their well-being?
So they wanted to collaborate on a number of different things. Some of it was economic benefits. So a part of the conversation about towns is, you know, what is the future like? What does an economic future look like? And of course, lots of conversations about local wealth building within that, and how do we create, you know, wealth that stays in the local place, you know, rather than wealth that gets transported out of the local place to other companies. So they were interested in how they can develop that. So one of the strands on that was about, and I really like the kind of creative market towns, you know, the market town idea of the future. And Martha does these fantastic kind of pop-up festivals. So, you know, relatively short term, you know, pop-up markets. And they did one on a vegan market. Now, you know, you have to know Martha and go to Martha to know that this is perhaps not the place that you would think that you know, would be a frenzy for a vegan activity. But that was really successful. So they were pleased. And I think it's that combination of, you know, creativity that some of those conversations brought out, and thinking differently about a place. You know, what could we do differently? You know, what we to do just a little bit outside the box to move this place further forward? So there's that kind of stuff. The heritage trail idea, the idea of better understanding our place and then shouting louder about it to our own community, came out really, really strongly. So we had, situations where they were just telling that story of place more consistently, as part of the Twin Towns programme, and using, there were leaflets that were made and, walking tours and all that kind of stuff that went on in the background and these kind of activities, and the cycle routes that I talked about there as well, So lots of really nice little tangible things, that they were able to do and push forward. I think one of the conversations that I really liked as part of it was the kind of sense that, if somebody else can do it, then why can't we do it? Right. So it sort of inspired a bit more of that creativity. So a lot of places get, sort of a can't do attitude drummed into them. You don't have permission to do it. You're not the right people to do it. You don't have the right skills to do it. And I think some of that creativity that was unleashed is really inspiring. To say, well, why not? Why can't we do it? If somewhere else like us has done it, then surely we can.
Great. And I imagine that's a benefit of having some similarities, because it helps to disrupt the story of, they're not like us and that's why we can't do it. That's why they could do it. But if there's enough similarity, people can go, oh, well, actually, they're not that different from us. Why don't we give it a go?
And what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah. Great, thank you. And interesting one from Josh, which hadn't crossed my mind, but do you think this model could work with neighbourhoods in a city? When I used to live in London, it never really, to me, felt like a place. It's more like sort of 20 or 30 or 50 different kind of places all kind of crammed together, and one end can feel like a completely different place to another. So does that mean that it might work? Have you got any kind of perspective on this, Jennifer?
I think so. It's really interesting you mentioned London. We did a survey last year asking people to self-identify place. How did they feel their place should be sort of recognised, whether it was a city or a suburb or a town or a village, and about 77% of people in London said that they lived in a town. Now, coming from Dunfermline, that is very clearly a town, trying to imagine that anybody in London could feel that they lived in a town, that's a bit of a jump,
Sure.
But I understand what they were saying about actually there is a clear geographical unit that they feel more sense of belonging to than London or Greater London as a whole. And I think that's the key, is that it has to have some kind of integrity as a place that isn't just lines on a map. So how do people refer to this as a small named place? So if you were thinking, for example, about Glasgow, people might talk about Mary Hill, so are they talking about Mary Hill, and is that a distinct geographical entity that people understand, that you could then use to find another distinct geographical entity that's like it and build those links? So I don't think it has to be a town, but I think it has to be a place that is recognised as a place, not just an administrative boundary.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. We've got a question from Judy. She says, has the project, the Twin Towns UK project, has that come to an end now? Was it just a pilot rather than an ongoing program in terms of funding and support?
So we were committed to that phase of it as a funder and as a partner, and we are really interested in, first of all, sharing what we found out from it and sharing some of the mechanisms of how you might go about doing it. As we've been doing that, we have an eye to whether or not there are other organisations that might co-fund. So because we're quite a small trust, covering the whole of the UK and the Republic of Ireland from here, so because we're quite small, it's difficult for us to say, well, okay, here was, a small piece, now let's translate it to 100 twins, because we wouldn't necessarily have the resources ourselves to do it. But we are on the lookout for other organisations who might be interested in kind or financial support to try and take that further forward.
Great. Okay, so there's some kind of possibility. So watch this space. So we've got another question from Josh, and maybe a time for one more after that, if anyone's got a burning question, which is, if we wanted to twin, say, Totnes with Dumfries, two creative small towns with active community projects, how would we go about it?
Oh,
that might be more than a couple minutes, that one.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you have to go back to that thing of finding the person. Who does it chime with? So if you are the person in Totnes, you have to find the person in Dumfries who's interested in that. So one of the ways into it might be to find the organisation or the community group or the person in the council who is responsible for the European twinning programme. So finding somebody who delivers a connection further afield and see whether they're interested in building that connection and that idea of twinning locally. So they'd be familiar with twinning, but not familiar with domestic twinning. So you could try in that way. The other places that are, certainly I would say in contemporary public policy are sort of considered particularly low down the rung of places that you might go to find community engagement, is it's sort of standard mechanisms, almost traditional mechanisms of community engagement, like the local chamber, like the local church, things like the PTA or the housing association, tenant group, parent group, where you might just be able to find people who are interested enough in having a different kind of conversation. And I say they're down the rung because there's been a lot of time in policy conversations where people talk about, engaging with the community as if it's some great mythical beast, and very difficult to identify. And so, you really just have to go to where people gather, and these are the places that people gather, but they tend not to gather because they want to be a convenient group for the council to engage with. They tend to gather because they're interested in local housing, or they're interested in local kids, or they're interested in, the quality of the local environment, so it's finding those people to spark a conversation with. I mean, certainly I know our twins did an awful lot more outreach within their communities as part of the programme than I think they had envisioned, so that starting in your own backyard bit, of trying to identify who else locally might want to be part of that. I think most of our twins would suggest doing that sooner rather than later in the process. But going back to what you were saying earlier, you don't want to overburden this. This is relationship building. So I wouldn't overburden it with process, find interested people, have interesting conversations and see where it takes you.
Great. So start in the pub or start the village food market or something. And I guess there are other networks to help, like Nextdoor, that maybe once you've got a bit of a core group, you can put the word out on those networks or on community Facebook groups to try and build a bit of a critical mass and fill any gaps that you've got in knowledge or connections. Thanks, Jennifer. We've just got time for one more. So Roger's asked, there's a lot of interest in Southwest England in standing for election as town councillors. So Freeman and Buckfastleigh are sort of particularly renowned for this. How much do you hear about this kind of work, and is there anything that we can do to sort of promote your work there? So yeah, I mean, maybe this is one that you might want to go and think about a bit. But I mean, have you got any sort of particular lobbying at that level asks to how can we tell the story of the benefits of this to prospective candidates and serving town councillors?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there are two strands to that. We do send out information. We have a huge database at Carnegie, but it's very difficult to get people's attention with things. So going back to that point about people influence people, it's far more compelling if anybody, sort of listening to this passes it on to somebody that they know, and allow that natural human relationship to develop, and transfer information that way. And the other side to it is the political parties side and how it filters through a party mechanism to get to local candidates. And that's not something that we have particularly engaged with. I mean, we're a charity and we have to be a little bit careful about engaging with anything that might be deemed party political anyway. But I would have thought that there might be some solutions to that, particularly if we were, sort of able to find the regional hooks rather than the national ones.
Yeah, sure. And you probably get more done at that level anyway. Great. Okay. I don't think we've got any more questions. So there's just a few things that might be useful for people in case they want to sort of learn about the actual program, or just the ways to kind of apply this in their own communities. So there's the Journeys of Understanding report, and I like the way that you sort of introduce that on the Carnegie website, Jennifer, the sort of to see ourselves as others see us. That sort of seems to sum up the ethos of that. So would you like to just say a little bit about the report, and maybe sort of how any particular sections that might be helpful?
Absolutely. So the report, so I would say it is relatively short in terms of a policy report. So, while I do like writing, it was our associate Pauline who wrote this and has written it in a very accessible way. So, please don't put off, anybody in terms of downloading it and accessing it. I would certainly say that the section for me that's most interesting is the one that talks about how you can understand those emerging themes in a way that also speaks to the future of towns and what we understand the challenges are. So trying to make those links and this reference to sort of international work on the town summit and so on, that you can lead to and say, well, this feels like in some ways a very small intervention, but these types of interventions may be the solution to some of those bigger problems that people are grappling with, not just in the UK, but actually internationally, about how we help smaller places thrive.
Great. That's great, thanks. And I thought there was some really good and useful kind of lessons in there, because I think it can be a bit challenging to sort of process all of the things that come out of such a long program, a year and a half of sort of lessons. That it's a great summary. There's also your Brexit and Towns report. Would you just say a little bit about that?
So if you are a policy wonk and you want to read the long report, there is a long report on the website about Brexit and towns, which talks about that analysis that I was saying at the beginning about places that have felt a loss of control and how that contributed to the Brexit vote, and how we can see that really in our history, our industrial strategy, and therefore what are the things that we might have to do differently as we plan for a shared prosperity fund and the next steps of funding for local places post Brexit. So if you're really interested in the detail of it, then the long report by a renowned academic, Duncan McLennan, is well worth a read. But we also did summarise it in a nifty, kind of things to think about leaflet, which if you're working in a local place and you're interested in how you might process some of that complicated information into what it means for you, then it's worth just a quick glance. And it's only 8 pages, so we really did try to bring that down to a manageable amount of information in a complex field.
Yeah, that does. I mean, you could easily read that traveling to check out a potential town twinning candidate, couldn't you? Especially given the standard amount of sort of train delay. So that sounds very accessible. That's great. Thanks. There's also this possibility to input into something called the Shared Prosperity Fund that you mentioned to me. Would you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for the viewers who are familiar with this landscape, and in a post-Brexit world, some of the funding that would have come through, say, structural funds will be translated into a shared prosperity fund for the UK, but the government still has to make an awful lot of decisions on that, and they're quite critical decisions about how we're going to support places around the UK. So they have a consultation coming forward on that in the autumn, which we are, and many others are eagerly awaiting. But if people are interested in feeding in to that, their stories or their experiences or their asks of government, then we'd be delighted to hear that and push that through in terms of our thinking and into our response. I know, very few people have interest in processing, sort of 100-page government documents to answer one question. But we'd be delighted to hear from people with real experience of what it's like working and living in towns, so that we can feed that up.
Great. So I'll just share. The best thing is for people to email you if they want sort of input into that consultation. So I've just shared your email in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, I think there was one more thing. In the course of kind of reading around this, I came across your place of kindness work, and I really liked the video that you pulled together. So finally, if you just kind of mention a bit about that, and it seems to sort of summarize in maybe a more accessible way than a report, just some of the benefits of making these kind of connections.
Yeah. So we've really loved the kindness work. It's, one of the things that we know is that people need to build relationships in order to have their own personal well-being, but we're not very good at investing in the places that people need and the spaces that they need in order to build that kind of relational kindness. So, one of the things in the place of kindness that we, to talk about is about, places where you can just meet and hang about, and how our civic space is decreased, and there are just less opportunities for people to bump into each other, to have those conversations, those quick conversations, the things that build up into a sense of belonging, a sense of place. Quite often, we would say to people, there's a huge focus in the UK at the moment on the rising levels of loneliness, and say, well, if loneliness is the problem, then kindness is the solution, and we need to spend more time thinking about how we can build kindness in, not by telling people to be kinder, but by creating the spaces for them to exhibit that very human behavior themselves, so we can make decisions that crowd out kindness, that leave no space for it, no time for it, no respect for it, or we can make a different set of decisions that actually allow people to act in kindness, going about their daily business. Oh, I've lost your sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got carried away with muting myself while I was typing. I was just saying, whether or not you need to pick me up, I think it's really worth a watch. It's very inspiring in terms of how people can benefit from making these kind of connections. We've got a couple spare minutes, so I might just crowbar in provide one more question from Tracy in Totnes. And she says that the majority of groups appear to have been entirely volunteer-led. How can we elicit high levels of community engagement across all community groups and increase motivation for people to improve their towns and communities? So, for example, in Totnes, we see relatively high levels of volunteer participation, but it's usually a mix of seasoned activists and older people. So how do we bring in wider voices, to make sure that these relationships are actually representative and they don't become sort of another source of division, that certain demographics have got these connections and everyone else then ends up more kind of isolated in a way?
The politics of small places, it's a minefield, isn't it? Some of the stuff I was talking about earlier, so if I jump out of the twin towns and into my wider background on community engagement and empowerment, we do have a tendency in policy or in any government activity when we're trying to do this kind of thing, we the collective, we as society, to think about bringing people to us, that we need other people to change their behaviours and to come to us, and actually that's completely the wrong way of looking at it, and it's much more about going out to where people already are, and speaking to them on their turf and language that they understand about what they want, and I have to say, in 20 years, I've never actually found a difficulty in doing that. I found a difficulty in getting people to come to, sort of posh hotels and have conversations with, senior people in inverted commas, but I haven't had a problem with getting people to, come and, spend a bit of time in a room next to, next to the school, that the head teachers kindly let us have a conversation about what they want for their kids in the area, so I think there's just almost a sense of we have over professionalized some of this, you know, over complicated it, and we need to get back to the idea of, you know, these are just people, they're just local people. Go out and find them and have a conversation that they understand, use language that they understand, because our language in, you know, policy research, you know, our academia is impenetrable and relatively useless, you know, which is one of the reasons why I like the kindness work so much, because we're using language that people can connect with. That, you know, if you wanted to tell me a story about kindness, Laurie, that would have as much validity as me telling you a story about kindness in my life. You know, there's no power structure here, you know, or power imbalance when we use that kind of language and when you connect with people on a really human level. So that would be, you know, my advice in all of this is almost, you know, to go back to deconstruct it, you know, to the point where you're saying, well, where are people, you know, and how can we talk to people and talk to them, you know, in terms of what they want for their local places, rather than being too constrained by boxes.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's a lovely note to end on, and just a reminder that everyone's human and everyone wants to have their voices heard and wants to connect with people, and that it doesn't matter kind of who you're reaching out to, that there'll be some way to make a connection with people, even if they're not from the typical kind of demographics that you might be used to engaging with. Well, time is up, so it's time to wrap things up. Just a final note for me is that we're going to take a webinar break in June, and we'll probably return at the end of July. We're just taking some time to reflect on webinars to date and make sure that they're providing you with as much value and interest and use as we'd like. So keep an eye on the social channels and on our newsletter to find out when the next webinar will be and the guests and topic. So Jennifer, thank you so much for making time in your packed schedule and life, given that you're sort of doing 2 jobs and many other projects going on. 2 jobs and 2 boys. I mean, that's effectively at least 4 jobs. So that's incredibly impressive. And thank you everyone for making time after the bank holiday weekend, when you're possibly, well, hasn't been a bank holiday weekend for everyone, I guess. I know it's not, hasn't been in Scotland, but whatever you're up to at the weekend, thanks for making time this evening to join us. We hope you found it useful, and best of luck exploring the towns or other, you know, villages and communities that you might make a connection with. And I hope you have a lot of fun doing it. And please do share any stories with us through social media, or drop us an email. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, and Jennifer, I'll see you shortly on another version of Zoom.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.